Hello, and welcome to another presentation of the Hopkinton Historical Society Archives. You may have seen our first episode where we talked about the Fitch collection, and now we have a new episode where we're talking about the old Central Turnpike. And joining me here today and giving this presentation is Joe Hall, who's been a longtime resident of our community and a member of the Historical Society. So with that, Joe, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jim. I'm delighted to be here at HCAM TV. I'm a 30-year resident in Hopkinton and have lived and worked in the area that whole time. And we had taken an interest in the Central Turnpike because living and working in this area for so long, occasionally I would hear people refer to the Central Turnpike. And I would be given directions. Oh, you just take the Central Turnpike to go to this or that destination, directions. And I wouldn't know what they were talking about. I'd have to Google it or whatever. Anyway, if I was talking to somebody east of Hopkinton, nobody ever mentioned the Central Turnpike. So I was curious. Why was this? Where did the Central Turnpike go? Could you drive the route today? How were turnpikes even created and what caused their demise? In addition, it turns out that the deed to my house has the phrase, "This site is located at the toll house," parentheses, old Central Turnpike. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I talked to my friend John Palmer at the Historic Society and asked him, how could I look into this? This was kind of what piqued our interest. And John said he would help me, and and he also thought this would make a great topic for an article. So what I'm presenting here today is a visual. This is the movie version of the book, the article that will appear in an upcoming version from the Hopkinton Historic Society. We'll tell you at the end of the presentation how you can get a printed copy or an electronic copy of the article, which will have more pictures and more details on what I'm about to talk about. I've referred to Hopkinton before, aside being a wonderful community, as the gateway to the Blackstone Valley. And we've all seen the signs on 495 referring to the Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor. That's maintained by the National Park Service, was federally funded to set up. It's a huge area, and I'll get into that area a bit. But first, I'd like to go over a little historic context, which I think you'll mostly know, but I think it sets up the presentation. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to refer to some notes because I do have some quotes that I want to read from. But just going back and create the historical context, we all know the Plymouth Plantation was established in 1620 with the Pilgrims coming over and establishing one of the first settlements. Other settlements would soon follow. And of course, the British are looking to get raw materials out of the Americas and then shipped over for profit. This would become the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Other settlements were created in 1625. A gentleman by the name of William Blackstone is acclaimed to have been the first European settler in Suffolk Peninsula, now Boston. After 10 years, Mr. Blackstone moved to what is now the valley that bears his name. His name was spelled Blaxton, but now he moved out where the Nipmuc Indians, which you've heard of, occupied this area for eons before the arrival of the English settlers, and he settled among them. And bringing English ways and more people to the valley, this was the beginning of not only the Industrial Revolution, the American Industrial Revolution, but in the early years, they were doing subsistence farming. This fellow Blackstone seemed to have lived quite well with the natives. There was trading. The Nipmuc did call this area where William Blackstone has settled. The Blackstone Valley is also called the Kitticook, and that means Great Tidal River. So that was the first name of the Blackstone River. And it was full. It had salmon, seemed like not a bad place to live. They lived on what the Indians called the Three Sisters: corn, squash, beans. There was migratory fowl like the Canada geese. There was native fowl like the turkey, and hunting deer and beaver and fox and all manner of protein. It sounds like a pretty healthy diet, and that's what the Indians lived on. And there was some trading. The Indians made baskets, which the settlers could make use of, and other items. And of course, the settlers had different ways of farming, but there was some trade early on. Of course, 50 years after 1625, which was when Boston was founded, this fellow William Blackstone had moved to Cumberland, Rhode Island. Cumberland, Rhode Island? You mean like Cumberland Farms? Exactly like Cumberland Farms. That is Cumberland Farms. And that was a dairy that was supplying this whole area. Now, before they were a convenience store and a gas station, they were a dairy farm, a big dairy farm. And as things developed, there was more trade but more conflict. The English farmed differently. They did clear cutting. They farmed, kind of commercial in an industrial way because this was how the English did it. Indians traveled much more lightly on the land. In 1675, the King Philip War occurred. And this is where the son of Massasoit, remember I reminded you about the Plymouth plantation, that was his era, and 50 years later was his son, King Philip. Well, the British have a king, I'm going to be a king. So he organized what was called the Algonquin region. And all of this is local history, which kind of informs the growth of the area. There was a battle with the settlers in 1675, where the Indian nations combined, attacked 25 English settlements, which were there at the time. But the following year, they were repelled. So you could see that there was tensions, and America was growing. It was expanding greatly. The settlers used to engage in subsistence fishing, farming. America was exporting cod, tobacco. They were importing finished goods, skilled and unskilled labor, British ways, some British religion. Remember, why were they coming? Some of them were getting away from the oppressive religion. They wanted to practice religion freely. Americans were importing tea, guns, disease. England was exporting their culture and their laws to the new country. 100 years after Blackstone moved to Cumberland, the town of Hopkinton was incorporated, 1735. But in the 1700s, settlers were moving westward. They would establish villages which became cities of Worcester, Providence, Hartford, and certainly Hopkinton. And they were coming for the rich farmland and the grazing areas. The cottage industries were springing up, weaving, shoes, hats, farm tools. These were things the English settlers were able to produce. And villages would emerge producing, at the seacoast, they were producing ships. As you get inland, they were producing furniture, and every village had a public house which had to be connected to the roads. So this is the beginning of the post roads. From the rivers, a nation rises. This is the story of the Blackstone River and Canal. In East Hartford Ave in Northbridge, there's a visitors center which describes the canal and the Blackstone Valley. It's called the Rice City Pond. Rice City comes from the name of an auto graveyard that was there, and the Parks Department bought it out, got rid of all the old broken down cars. Now that's hiking trails which allow you to access what would be called the hardest working river in America. And I'm going to read you a quote by Winthrop Packard. Is on that sign at the trailhead for the King Philip Trail. The hardest working river in America, most thoroughly harnessed to the mill wheels of labor, is the Blackstone. William Packard said that in 1909. And the whole Blackstone Valley was growing. Nowadays, to get to the Blackstone Valley, the access road is West Main Street, and that will lead you in. A lot of people don't refer to Hopkinton as the gateway to the Blackstone Valley. There are a lot of ways to get there, but it is. A couple of other things. I mentioned the state park, but a couple of places that I should mention is the Blackstone River Valley and Canal. This is the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. They have a visitors center in Northbridge. It's something called Riverbend Park. It's hiking, there's an interpretive area there. A lot of the history about the early settlers is in that visitors center. It's a wonderful place. I'm sure the school children around here have been there. If you haven't, this is a wonderful little day trip. And it's about 8 miles from where I'm filming now, here in downtown Hopkinton. In addition, the Park Service has the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. It basically follows Route 122 from Worcester down to the Rhode Island line, and a huge area. A third point of interest is a National Historic Site in its own right, and it's the Samuel Slater Mill. In 1793, it opened in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Central Falls, Rhode Island. But as America grew, so did the need to transport raw materials and finished goods. People in the early roads could not transport these things. In 1767, the first coach began between Boston and Hartford. That was created by Thomas Sabin. 10 years later, everything changed. Here in Hopkinton, we had the Shays Rebellion. We had the Whiskey Rebellion, not here, but that was another issue with government. We had the cry of no taxation without representation. You can see where this is going. The Boston Massacre, and then the battles began. In April 1775, the British decided to take these upstarts and teach them a lesson, and it was kind of fought to a draw. Later that year, we'd have the fight at Breed's Hill. We call it Bunker Hill. The British won that. They got the hill, but at tremendous cost. And later, just mostly to give an idea of how the roads were unsuited for heavy equipment. Hauling military artillery was a whole different challenge with supplies. These roads just weren't supportive. Even though you could take a post road, which is for the mails to get from Boston to New York. That's what the Boston Post Road is. You could get things back and forth, but travel was uncomfortable, and America had more frontier than infrastructure. There's no better illustration of this than Colonel Henry Knox and his campaign to haul the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York in the winter at the end of 1775 and hauled this cannon down New York, across the Berkshires, across 20, not the way the Mass Pike is now, much further north, more like the Mohawk Trail, onto Route 20, through Marlborough, and then into Dorchester Heights. They arrived on March 4th, 1776. 2 weeks later, the British were gone. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but if you're in Boston or anywhere in Suffolk County, that's a holiday named Evacuation Day. And that was the last battle, significant battle that was fought in Boston. The rest of the Revolutionary War would be fought elsewhere. And then in 1800, shortly after our new nation was born, a different revolution occurred, the American Industrial Revolution. Mills were flourishing, the Slater Mill, the Stanley Mill, the Draper Mill. Mills provided employment for this growing area. Villages provided the workers, and rivers provided the power. The country was growing. In 1828, the Blackstone Canal, right alongside, using the Blackstone River. If the Pawtucket Red Sox had to move to Worcester back in 1830, they wouldn't have had to take 146 or any of the overland roads. They could have taken the Lady Carrington, because locks had been built in Millville and in Goat Hill in Northbridge to allow passage of boat travel, barges. So these barges were horse-drawn and hauled up there. Well, how big was this Lady Carrington? They could have made it in one trip. All the players, all the coaches, all the support staff, some of the concessions, and all the equipment could have fit on this 70-foot wooden-built boat. This Blackstone Canal was built. It started operation in 1828, and it ran until 1847, when the railroad came, the Worcester-Providence Railroad, and made it obsolete. This could transport heavy loads. However, you look at the river now, and you don't see these. This is a shallow river now. How could these have gotten these huge weights up there? Well, when they put the railroad through, a lot of the dams were taken down. So the level of the Blackstone River is much lower today than it was then. So time goes on a little bit, and to make roads more passable, more safe, and more efficient, the company, the Commonwealth wasn't able to, didn't have the funds. They weren't going to build roads across the country. So they would grant a charter. The Massachusetts legislature could grant a charter to build, maintain, and of course charge tolls. And this is how they had private funding to build turnpikes. And these were built across New England. How many turnpikes, you may ask? 242 in all of New England. 66 in Massachusetts and 100 in Connecticut alone, all sanctioned by the state government and all paid for by private investors. One of these was the Central Turnpike, which operated from 1830 to 1836. And as it was announced in the newspaper, this road was available, built, and now ready for travel on March 5th, 1830. It went from Wellesley Center through the town of Hopkinton, following the exact route of, well, not the exact route, almost the exact route of Main Street today. From the Ashland border through East Main Street in the center of town, West Main Street to Upton. This is mostly Route 135, except the old turnpike departed from Route 135 at Wood Street. 135 goes down Wood Street towards Westboro, but if you wanted to go to Upton or Hartford, you would stay on West Main Street, and that would continue on the Central Turnpike. The Central Turnpike ended in Dudley, Massachusetts, at the Connecticut line. Didn't go through Rhode Island at all, and where it meets Tolland, Connecticut. There was another turnpike there called the Center, not Central, Center Turnpike, and that went from Connecticut down to Hartford. You can drive the road of the Central Turnpike today. You could begin it at Grove and Washington Streets in Wellesley, stay on 135, and stay on Route 135. You can drive the whole route, except in Upton. There's a detour where Shining Rock Golf Club is. It did go through Upton, and if you get the article, you'd be able to read the exact route. But it does take a detour. The Central Turnpike did not, but nowadays you'd take a detour, go down towards the Nipmuc High School, and work your way through near Riverdale Mills, and then it reconnects back with the old Turnpike at Route 122. The highest point of the Turnpike is in Hopkinton, right where the water tower is at the intersection of School Street and West Main. It's 525 feet above sea level, and just for comparison, the Prudential Tower is 725 feet above sea level, more or less. The thing about I talked a moment earlier about the financing. The turnpikes were financed by private industry, and I mentioned the Slater Mill. One of the investors was Samuel Slater, and he had a couple of partners. And the way that once they got this charter, unlike today, turnpikes would be dissolved when the debt was paid. We have a turnpike, that debt's been paid, but it's a source of tax revenue now. That's a public good. So no matter how you feel, I guess we all know how we feel about taxation. I happen to think I'm happy to pay it to live in the great community, in the great state, and a great country. And all the benefits that we get. But to retire the debt was they were basically run for 20 years, was the thinking that if you collected 5% on your principal for 20 years, you'd get your principal back, and then another 12% was for profit and expenses. And this was enough to retire, and that was the expectation. None of them worked. Almost every turnpike was a financial failure for the investors. However, somebody like Samuel Slater, who had a going business concern, who needed to transport heavy equipment, and think of how long it would have taken to get up West Main Street with the rocky, rutted, wet roads. Dangerous. If I could just find a way to get through that town of Hopkinton and not take 2 days to do it, well, this is what the benefit was. Slater became a millionaire, but he didn't do it by investing in turnpikes. This brings us back into Hopkinton. I'd like to kind of zero in on the town. Recent artifacts have come to light lately about the toll houses in Hopkinton, and I'd like to share that a little bit with you. Two letters have come to light. One is the Cheney letter. The Cheney letter describes the 3 toll houses. It was written by Harry Cheney in 1951, and he talks about the 3 toll houses. Describes toll gate number 1 at 123 East Main Street, which is across from Clinton Street. You drive by there today. There's no marker, but that's where it is. In addition, the Gladys Morse note, also in 1951. I don't know if they knew each other or why they were writing notes about the toll houses, but they both did. Gladys describes a photograph and mentions the Fairbanks property, which is also mentioned in the Cheney letter. She talks about the Rafferty property, also mentioned in the Cheney letter. At the Historic Society, if you want to see the green door off the house, where the toll house was, that's one of the archives that's in the Great Room at the Historic Society, which also features the old sign from Colella's Market, which I think anybody who's been here for more than a decade probably remembers. Fondly, I might add. Toll house number 2 was near the brook, according to the Cheney letter, near the hardware store, right in the center of town. Again, locals who have been here will remember the hardware store. This brook ran between John Ward's barbershop today and where CVS is now, but where Colella's Market was. We think it discontinued operation because there's no other reference to this that we could find. And whether you're a journalist or a historian, you really want secondary verification, and we could not find that. It may exist. I suspect that since it's that was even then probably a busy intersection. Now it's the intersection of Route 85 and 135, or Cedar Street and Main Street if you prefer. but that must have been a bustling area, too much to stop people and collect a turnpike toll. Toll house number 3 is on 300 West Main Street. The Cheney letter mentions a large white oaks, and this toll house being 560 feet west of the Stearns Corner. Stearns Corner is where the water tower is, right at the intersection of School Street and West Main. And that gives us a pretty good location. Plus those white oaks appear to still be there. And these were mentioned to be at the northwest corner of the toll house. So that we think we have pretty good evidence. In addition, William Carroll and Millie Carroll, who lived at 300 West Main, built the house in 1949. They passed in 1991, and a year later the lot was subdivided. 7 acres became 4 lots, 3 of them, 300, 302, 304 West Main, plus a wetland, an undeveloped lot. And we found that one of the deeds, 300 West Main Street, carries the phrase, "This site is the toll house of the old Central Turnpike." Again, corroborating the Cheney letter, which had this at the same location. What caused the demise of turnpikes? Listen to the exemptions. What could get you a free pass? If you were going to public worship, if you're going to or from any mill, if you were going to a farm, whether it was your farm or somebody else's farm, if you were going to ordinary business within the town. I had to get a dozen eggs. Okay. Oh, really? Okay. Free pass. Military. If the toll keeper was not there, he had to open the gate. No toll. But remember, this was a cash business. One can imagine community members, family members, free passage for barter, these kinds of things. So no wonder they had a hard time collecting the fees. Still, there were remnants of the old turnpike, many other routes going through the town. The old Connecticut Turnpike didn't go through this area. The Old Bay Path did. In fact, in front of our town hall, you might stop and take a look at the sign, which describes the Bay Path. There were other turnpikes, and before them, Indian paths, that have since become main thoroughfares. I mentioned Route 135 being the Old Bay Path, and we're familiar with that. Route 20 is the old Boston Post Road. Route 1 is the Providence Turnpike, and going through my hometown where I was born in Norwood, about connecting Boston to Providence. Route 9 is the Worcester Turnpike connecting Boston to Worcester. And 60 others, 60 other turnpikes. 19, which did get charters, but were never built. So I hope I've given you a little bit of an illustration about some of the interesting spots. One that I didn't mention, and a place called Lookout Point. This is an area in Northbridge. It's the end of the King Phillip Trail. And this is an area you get a commanding view. If you take nothing away from this presentation, I hope that you get down to Lookout Point and take the King Phillip Trail. It's a wonderful 1-hour walk out and back. Or if you care to take the secret way, you can get a copy of the newsletter.
Wow, that was amazing. It's clear your interest and your passion and your knowledge about a lot of this history, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. There's so many things that I didn't even know about.
Well, thank you, Jim. That makes me happy.
Yes, yeah, it's really awesome. So thank you for taking the time with us, and we hope that we see you again.
I look forward to it.
And thank you for joining us for this episode, and please stay tuned for the next one.